All right, guys, in our final comic list for 2022. Now, I know this is in 2023, but I just had to take time to actually read some of the things, catch up, make sure that my list was on point, and I think I finally have my top 10 DC comics. But real fast, before we get to that, I do have a couple of honorable mentions. So let me start off with Catwoman Lonely City. While I enjoyed this series throughout, I just never felt like it extended to the point of, oh my god, this is amazing, but it was always good, and then sometimes great. So that's always really nice. And I always love the idea of Catwoman basically just being older, not wanting to do the life of crime or be a hero. And then you kind of get her sucked back into the heist life. So if you like heist movies and things like that, I think this one will really work well for you. And it was a joy to actually look at because Chang's art is always amazing. Another one is the Joker. Now, this series was really good for me, though I thought the last arc, I guess you could call it, kind of teetered on just okay at points. But overall, it was a really interesting series, mostly because it was a Jim Gordon series, not even really a Joker series, and that I can always get more of. So overall, if you like more of a detective style, more of a humane or human side of the Batman world, I think this one worked really well. And plus, you get introduced to Vengeance, who I really enjoy as a character. The Flash almost ended up on my top 10. Now, this is a very lighthearted, very fun read, with the exception of maybe the tie-in for Dark Crisis. This mostly finishes up most of their story arcs in one or two issues, which is always a joy to kind of just pick up an issue and finish the story right there. And I think it's a lot of fun. I don't think it's amazing. I think we could do even more with Wally, but I do like the family dynamic a lot, and the art is sometimes really good and other times kind of feels stilted. So it's like this weird mix of it's really good, but not great for me. But I enjoy it, and you should check it out if you're a Flash fan. And last but not least is Dark Knights of Steel. Now, I enjoy this series a lot, though I felt like the pause between some issues kind of took away the anticipation for me a little bit. Overall, though, it is a fun series. It is interesting. It is basically Game of Thrones, but in the DC universe. And with some of the bigger twists coming on later in the series, it definitely leaves me open to see what we're going to end up in 2023. However, it doesn't reach my top 10 just because I don't really feel like I'm attached to the characters as much as I normally am in a Tom Taylor story, but I am intrigued with the story itself, the plot of it, and so for that, I will put it in honorable mentions. So starting off my top 10 is Swamp Thing, and I'll be the first to admit that the first arc of Swamp Thing didn't really do much for me. I'm not sure if it was just too much exposition or long-winded moments of understanding our new lead, but I was just not excited reading it. Luckily, though, I got the second arc, and I was very heavily invested, bringing in the Suicide Squad to hunt Swamp Thing while giving us Levi's, the new character, the new Swamp Thing's past, and him trying to come with terms of what happened and what he did. This arc was just a lot better for me in terms of pretty much anything. Kept me entertained the whole time, and of course the art remained strong as ever because it was good in the first arc and just as good in the second arc. While not hitting my top 5 maybe, the story for the second arc really boosted it and made it at least in my top 10. So Batman ends up on my list again, and of course this one is mostly because of Failsafe. Failsafe in particular is really what elevated Batman for me this year. Before that, Batman had been, teetering on just pretty much decent. It's never really bad, but not anything to write home about. And then came Failsafe, a Terminator 2-like storyline with Batman on the verge of dying almost every issue, Bat Family stepping in to help him, Batman going to extreme lengths to stop a pretty much unstoppable force of robotic nature. It's just so much fun. And it's almost a spiritual successor to the Justice League Tower of Babel storyline, so I really like that. This is the type of Batman story I need injected into me every once in a while, just a high-octane, crazy action arc. And yeah, I was just glued to it. I read it in one sitting and I couldn't stop reading. All right, coming in number 8 is Dark Crisis on Infinite Earth. So this is the event to end all events. I really gotta stop with that joke, but it isn't really that. However, it is a great showcase for John as Superman and Nightwing as mainly the protector of Earth in ways. It's really about heroes stepping up when there is a void in the world of superheroes of the past. I really love the way John was written here, and doing what's right kind of in his nature and what his father and mother taught him worked really well. And Nightwing being the symbol of hope was always a good thing because that's who he is, and it stayed true here. And this was just a fun event. It was a breezy read and some really great action scenes, and well, the middle of the event was a bit iffy for me. The opening and especially the ending were excellent fun times for comics for me, and I really just enjoyed this event as a fun read. Number 7 is Action Comics, and while I think the World arc went on a bit too long for me, it still captured who Superman was to a T, and the ending was satisfying, and though the art changed between two artists, and it can be drastic at times, it still remained solid throughout. The real highlight, though, is Clark, and Clark is back on Earth at the end of this, and it just works flawlessly in terms of character development and who he is and what you want from Clark as Superman. I'm more excited actually now than ever for 2023 Action Comics because this is what I want, the family dynamic, Clark back on Earth, dealing with those issues. I think this is going to end up in my top 5 next year if it's as good as it was this year, but even more so back on Earth with the family dynamic. I think Action Comics is about to hit my top 5 next year in 2023. So coming in at number 6 is Deceased, and this is the final arc of Deceased, or the final storyline, and I don't think it's as strong as the previous series. The end of the series is still, though, highly entertaining. Something about Tom Taylor built such this great and fantastic version of these characters, and they always make me smile, especially Damian and John in here as being more adult. They really worked really well for me, and while the twists and turns aren't as hard-hitting as the past arcs in the Deceased universe, I still really enjoyed it, and I have a blast reading this. This is one of those Elseworld series that it just makes it fun to read, you know, and sometimes we like that, especially if you like zombies, because they are like maniac zombies. All right, and so we're going to get into our top 5 here, starting with Nightwing, and this is just always a joy to read. Even the weaker issues in this series are still a solid good time. I will say I wasn't the biggest fan of how they wrapped up the Blockbuster arc, but I am a huge fan of this Heartless fellow and his crusade against Nightwing. Something about him, something about his past, it's just intriguing to me. And I don't know why. It's not like the most original villain, but I like him. Also, Nightwing is always written really well. He has a lot of heart, and that is something that Nightwing hasn't had in years till this newest run. While it's not perfect, I think it's always just a good read. And that's saying something. When I pick up Nightwing and I know that it's going to be at least enjoyable, and I never have to worry about it being bad, it's so refreshing after years and years of, well, let's just say, not too fun Nightwings. Coming at number 4 is DC vs. Vampires, and if you told me this series would be on my favorites list or even in my top 5, I'd say you're lying, but here we are. Vampires have infiltrated the DC main core group, getting key members of the Justice League while focusing on world domination. This is dark, almost hopeless at times series that keeps ramping up to a pretty satisfying ending. I won't say it's perfect, but it was satisfying. I do at times have to admit to myself that this is an Elseworld on the way the characters act and what happens to them, but the twists and turns keep it fun, and the brutal nature of it, a lot of the big moments that happen here, the twists, really just kept me glued to my seat, and I had to know what was going to happen next. This one, I always had a smile reading, and, you know, maybe that's a little weird for, you know, how fucked up it is at time, but I really enjoyed this series. Coming in at number 3 is Batman, Superman, World's Finest. This is a true example of how to bring the two biggest DC characters together and just make it a jam-packed comic that just somehow feels modern, yet has the moments that bring you back to the 60s, the 70s, a little bit of 80s, sometimes even the 90s, and the early 2000s. It's a great series about two friends working together and two of the best superheroes, with artwork by Dan Mora, who is absolutely amazing, especially after his work on Power Rangers. I expected no less, and this is just always such a fun read. If you want something that holds the spirit of comics of being a superhero and having two of the biggest leads maybe in the entire company, then you should be reading this one right now. But you know me, I'm more into the darker series in the end, and so number 2 is Rogues, and this is a very dark tale of the Rogues. That's right, Flash's gang of enemies years later in their older age. And they eventually want to pull off this big heist, getting together in a pretty funny fashion, actually, and heading into the world of trying to rob places, except they go to the worst place imaginable, Gorilla City. This is great. This is just a look into a pitiful man on the verge of figuring out how he wants to live or die at the end of his life, and a group of killers and losers somehow working together. It's funny at times, it's touching at times, and downright brutal at times. This is why I think Black Label is so important, because this is a type of Black Label book that you need to read and need to have to counteract more of just the everyday type of superhero stories. And my number one is not a superhero comic. It is Nice House on the Lake. Now, I put this in my indie list last year and people got mad because it is technically a DC book and it is a Black Label book. And if I'm going to put Predator and Alien on my Marvel list, which are pretty brutal, or if I did put Conan, I mean, why wouldn't the Nice House on the Lake fit into DC? It is a Black Label book. It is made by DC. And it is fantastic. A deep look into the world of loss, of trying to find yourself again after being stranded with almost no hope for humanity, a tale of friendship or thinking that you're friends, but what are people truly capable of, if you even want to call them people? So I'm trying to keep this vague and light on the details because, well, the spoilers can ruin this one, and it really is one you have to go in as blind as possible because it is a great mystery slash horror with intriguing characters, a great plot. This is one that you should read right away. Nice House on the Lakes wraps up with its issue 12. I won't spoil what happens at the end, but this is the one that you should be picking up and reading. I think is not only one of the best DC books of the year, or the best DC book, but one of the greatest comics I've read this whole entire year. And this series in general has started to creep into my top 40 of all time. So this is the one that you guys should be checking out right now. And that really wraps up my list for DC Comics. Now, DC has had a pretty powerful year for me. This was actually surprising because when I started this list, I've been reading a few DC comics, but I haven't been reading too many. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do a top 10, let me catch up on some that I wanted to, that I haven't read, that I've only read a few issues. And then it became really increasingly hard to choose my top 10. There's arcs in certain series that I like, but they just weren't good throughout the entire series, like Detective Comics, where I really liked the backup from Matthew Rosenberg. That story was great, but Mariko's ending to her detective was just okay. I liked her kind of like event that she had with the shadow a bat, but you know, things just didn't work out in some series all the way through. It didn't keep me entertained the whole year, I guess you could say. But saying that, I think DC really stepped up. I think a lot of their miniseries, a lot of their limited series really worked well. Now, you can see I had quite a few longer running series like Nightwing, Action Comics, and Batman, but I'd say things like Swamp Thing, where we're wrapping up very soon, or things like Deceased and Rogues and Nice House on the Lake, and even DC vs. Vampires. Like, these are series that are going from 6 to 12, maybe 15 issues, and you know they're ending, so you have a start, and a middle, and an end. And I think that just works really well for these series. They become increasingly some of my favorite series when it's a limited series. I think it just captures a story or plot better than having an extended run sometimes. But yeah, to me, DC really killed it this year. I really enjoyed it. I think they had a very strong year. Unlike some of their previous years that I've done this, where it's pretty easy to pick my top 10. This one took me a little while to figure out. But what about you guys? What did you think? Did DC have a great year for you? Did it suck? Did you not like any comics? Or were there only a couple that you liked? List them below of your favorite comics this year. I'd love to see them, and I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you do, as always, hit that like button. That means a lot to me. If you love my stuff, hit subscribe. I will be back for more. And that's pretty much it. I hope you check these out and go read some good-ass comics.